So Pokemon is a game that teaches children how to enter into the world of witchcraft.
The Pokemon trading card game is a new collectible card game that is made and distributed by Wizards of the Coast.
They are all Oriental demons.
Yep.
And as
There was
you
even a couple of reports where children had been stabbed by other children over Pokemon cards. Do you remember the Dungeons and Dragons game of the 80s where
These pocket
children...
Some people say Pokemon is anti-Christian, and by some people, I mean a lot of people. From all the way back in 1996 when Pokemon first released to present day, many have discarded Pokemon as a franchise incompatible with those who profess the Christian faith. But are they right? Does Pokemon actually go against teachings found in the Bible? Is the series really as evil as some Christian leaders make it out to be? And is it possible to enjoy Pokemon but still stay true to your Christian beliefs? Let's find out the truth right now. So what's the big deal? Why has Pokemon, one of the biggest media franchises of all time, been the center of such controversy over the last 20 years? Well, it all starts back in 1996 when the series first hit the scene. Pokemon was created by Satoshi Tajiri and Ken Sugimori, and it was first introduced to the public as a video game for the original Game Boy. Pokemon Red and Green didn't have a huge launch in Japan, but in just a few years, the series spread to the rest of the world, and no exaggeration, it took over. Kids everywhere were catching, training, and battling Pokemon in every school, home, and grocery store. You name it. Pokemania was here and it wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. The franchise was growing in popularity so fast that it began expanding to include trading cards, TV shows, movies, and more merchandise than you can keep up with. Pokemon was a hit and it was capturing the hearts of millions all over the world. But as with anything that rises in fame, Pokemon was met with some backlash. Some Christian leaders and families were understandably concerned about the content and themes presented in Pokemon. As most of you know, one of the primary mechanics in Pokemon is evolution, where different species turn into others after reaching a certain level. Christians who saw this believed it meant Pokemon promoted the belief in evolutionary theory, which goes against the belief that God created the world and every species that exists today, right? Well, maybe. Keep watching and we'll address that later. Similarly, concerns arose about the supernatural elements in the games. Pokemon have all sorts of powers, including those of psychic, ghost, and dark types. Some Christians believe that these elements and other descriptions found in the Pokedex promoted anti-Christian themes like the occult and other demonic practices. Articles were written, warnings were shared all across churches and Christian communities. It got to the point where some even called for the series to be banned in schools and other public places. But despite the criticism, Pokemon continued to grow in popularity. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Pokemon was a household name. The TV show was airing worldwide, kids were trading cards on the playground, and the games were more popular than they'd ever been. But why did criticism continue despite the popularity? Well, the thing is with Pokemon is that it's less about one specific criticism and more about a series of criticisms that add up together. Some of those I mentioned earlier, including evolution, demonic influence, and more. But is all that actually in Pokemon? Let's take a look. First off, let's look at evolution. Evolution is one of Pokemon's central and most recognizable mechanics. In it, when Pokemon reach a certain level or meet some type of requirement, they evolve into a more developed version of their previous species. For example, Pokemon like Eevee, which can evolve into multiple different forms, changes depending on what it's exposed to. But what about evolution in the real world? Well, evolution as a concept has two different definitions. The first and probably most familiar one is the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. And the second definition is something we'll take a look at later, so keep watching. But with this first definition, evolutionary theory has developed into a deeper field of study which seemingly contradicts the Christian belief that God created all things, including the animals of the Earth. With this in mind, Christians took the evolution mechanic of Pokemon to be incompatible with their beliefs. Seems fair enough. But now let's talk about occult themes. Occult themes refers to the supernatural and magical powers which can be found in various aspects of the Pokemon franchise. For instance, psychic Pokemon like Alakazam, known for its telekinetic abilities, and ghost-type Pokemon like Haunter, which can turn invisible and phase through walls, embody these themes. Moves like Hypnosis and Shadow Ball further highlight these supernatural elements, making some Christians wary of the influence such themes could have on players, especially children. But why are these occult themes a concern for Christians? Well, in the Bible, there are clear warnings against engaging with the occult, witchcraft, and other supernatural practices that go against God's teachings. Passages like Deuteronomy 18 verses 10 through 12 explicitly caution against activities like divination, sorcery, and communicating with spirits. For many Christians, the presence of these themes in Pokemon can be seen as promoting or normalizing practices that are against their faith. And I think the worry is that engaging with these elements in a game might desensitize players to the real-world implications of such practices. And that was one of the many reasons why I wasn't allowed to play growing up. You see, when I was in middle school, Pokemon Diamond and Pearl had just released, and it seemed like a new wave of Pokemania was sweeping through the nation, my school included. But one day I remember my friend giving me a few Pokemon cards as a gift. I was so excited to show my mom, but that excitement quickly turned to disappointment when I showed her my gift. She had heard all the rumors and criticisms about Pokemon that I mentioned earlier and immediately saw it as anti-Christian. Pokemon is short for pocket monsters, right? Quote, my mom. And that was enough for her to see it as evil and not what she wanted to influence her son. She made me rip up my cards then and there, and I didn't interact with anything related to Pokemon for years, including the anime. Looking back, I was pretty upset that my mom banned me from playing Pokemon. It was such a huge part of gaming culture, and it still is to this day. I missed out on a lot of opportunities to connect with other kids my age, and the excitement that came with being a Pokemon fan. But even in that, I will say this experience gave me a unique perspective on Christians' aversions to Pokemon. As I grew older, I could totally understand why Christian parents wouldn't want their kids interacting with games and toys that showcase some of the dark themes and imagery that we see in Pokemon. Sure, Pokemon is a fictional series, meaning that none of the content in it is actually real, but it can still be very addictive, and if you're not careful, you could easily grow an unhealthy attachment to the dark themes that the games present. I realize now that it's important to be cautious about what content we engage with, especially as kids. And Pokemon probably wasn't the best place for my faith to grow as I became more committed to Jesus and living life his way. But now that I'm older, I've thought deeply about this subject, and I have a sobering answer to today's question that may surprise you. I don't think Pokemon is anti-Christian, and I think playing Pokemon is generally okay, with some caveats here and there. Let me explain. First off, let's address the evolution in the room. The word evolution can definitely be a red flag for many Christians based on the definition we talked about before. But remember when I said we talked about evolution's second definition? Well, its second definition is stated as the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form. I believe this more accurately describes what we see in Pokemon versus the real world. For example, in the games, Charmander evolves into Charmeleon, which then evolves into Charizard as it progresses and gains experience. But you'd never see something like a Charmander evolving into a Wartortle, because they're in totally different families or species of Pokemon. So here we see that the evolution in Pokemon isn't a matter of change over millions of years, but simply a gameplay mechanic that shows the strength of your team. So again, while the term may seem controversial, the way it's used in Pokemon doesn't contradict Christian beliefs about creation at all. And guess what? Even if Darwin's evolutionary theory is true and it's represented the way that we see it in the games, it's still a process that required God to be even possible in the first place. And similarly, let's address the concerns about occult themes. Listen, I get it. When you see Pokemon like Alakazam with its psychic powers or Gengar with its ghostly abilities, it can seem pretty demonic. Like, why would any Christian even take a chance in playing a game that has those attributes? Well, here's the thing. Just because Pokemon has these elements doesn't mean it encourages any of its players to dabble in them. I mean, think of Pokemon like the way you would any other fantasy story, like Lord of the Rings, or even Chronicles of Narnia. Sure, those have more overt Christian themes, but they also have magical and supernatural elements. It doesn't mean that they promote witchcraft or encourage their fans to idolize their characters. And think about it, even the Bible talks about some very dark and supernatural things, but that doesn't mean that we're called to participate in those things. And if anything, the Bible warns us about these things, and in a way Pokemon does as well. And no, I'm not comparing Pokemon to the Bible for anyone who wants to clip that. All I'm saying is that when you just play Pokemon and look at it in the context of the franchise as a whole, it doesn't contradict Christian teachings or beliefs in any way. If there is any danger to playing Pokemon, I'd say it's the addictive nature. Kids at a young age and even adults can fall into the trap of idolizing the entertainment that Pokemon brings. But if you ask me, if you're strong enough in your faith to say no to addiction and old enough to know the difference between fiction and non-fiction, Pokemon could be a great pastime for you. So what's our final verdict when it comes to Pokemon? Is it truly anti-Christian? In my opinion, the short answer is no, but the long answer is, it depends. As someone who's a Christian, and as someone who's been playing Pokemon for several years, I can assure you that Pokemon has never once led me astray from my faith. I believe that Jesus was Lord when I started playing Pokemon, and I believe he's still Lord as I play Pokemon today. To me, playing or not playing Pokemon is a matter of what the Bible says about conscience. If Pokemon leads you astray from putting God first in your life, or it leads to consuming most of your time that should be devoted to God, then it's a good sign that it's probably the best not to play. But if you are actively pursuing Christ, obeying his word, and walking in the purpose he has for your life, I don't see any harm in enjoying a series that he gave humans the creativity to even come up with in the first place. I don't believe playing or engaging with Pokemon is inherently sinful, but I do believe that the way it's manipulated or obsessed over can lead to sin, just like any other form of entertainment. As we wrap up, here's my final thoughts. If you're a Christian, I want to encourage you to approach Pokemon and any other form of media for that matter with wise judgment and sober thinking. I think despite everything I've shared in this video, the most important thing for you to remember is to prioritize your faith. While I think Pokemon is a great source of fun and entertainment, our commitment to following Jesus should always be number one. And if you find that some aspects of Pokemon make you uncomfortable or go against your convictions as a believer, don't feel bad about distancing yourself from it. But similarly, don't criticize other believers who do find enjoyment in it. I think Pokemon is a great franchise, and if you do too, I encourage you to find ways of enjoying it while also keeping your heart and mind submitted to Jesus, the one who gave us the opportunity to enjoy it in the first place. Hey guys, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you learned something new, were encouraged, or just enjoyed the content, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Doing so will help my channel a ton and share the message of the gospel with gamers and beyond. I also recently started a Discord to help our growing community connect in spaces outside of YouTube, so if you're interested in being a part of that, be sure to check out the link in the description or my channel. I'd also appreciate it if you checked out some of my other videos here. My channel is built to explore the intersection between gaming and faith, and you'll find a handful of videos like this one on screen now. I appreciate you all, thanks, and God bless, and I'll see you next time.